The door to the emergency ward was a hinge with a conscience, groaning each time a stretcher nose-dived through it, then stopping like an arm across a chest. On a hard noon that smelled of bleach and hot dust, Aminata arrived with her son wrapped in a faded football jersey, his breath a thin ribbon slipping away. The cashier's window sat before the triage desk like a guardhouse, glass smudged by desperate fingers. A ledger lay open behind it, thick, blue-lined arithmetic of suffering, where fees were penciled before pulses were checked. The nurse at reception, Miriam, had learned to listen for the breath before the billing, but the rule was written otherwise on a laminated sign. Payment required prior to care, policy 11.3. Aminata had no cash, only a small phone with a cracked screen and a borrowed sachet of hope. Dr. Sori walked in from the corridor with the measured stride of someone guarding a boundary. He wore authority like a white coat that never wrinkled. "Procedure," he said, without looking at the child. He had learned to say the word as if it were a diagnosis. The boy's chest fluttered, a breath, then a swallow of silence. "Please," Aminata whispered, pressing her forehead to the counter's edge. Behind the glass, the cashier's finger hovered over a carbon copy receipt book, poised to write a number that would translate a life into currency. Miriam felt the familiar split within her, training on one side, policy on the other, like two doors slightly ajar but jammed by a wedge called fear of reprimand. The ward's fan worked in slow circles, chopping the heat into larger pieces. A porter rolled past with oxygen tanks chained like tall green sentries, and the hiss of possibility trailed him. Everyone knew the map carved into this hospital. The door to help was not the door you entered. It was the door your money opened. WhatsApp groups outside buzzed with rumors of brokers who could fast-track a bed if you paid the facilitation, a word that slid easily through mouths too weary to fight. It wasn't one villain, people said. It was the ledger. It was the door. That morning, the radio had carried news of a visit. The leader, Ibrahim, would tour the district hospitals. People argued whether it would change anything or just freshen paint. In tea stalls and taxis, the conversation stuck on the same thorn. Every system has a gate. The wrong people guard it. Aminata had not heard the radio. She had walked from the outskirts, the child bundled against dust and sun. At the ward, her path ended at glass and a number she did not know. "Go to the pharmacy first," the doctor said, sliding a list through the slot. "Purchase the bag. We cannot dispense before you pay." The bag meant gauze, cannulas, a plastic mask, 2 vials with names longer than prayers. The child's breath clipped again, thread thinning. Miriam lifted a stethoscope, a reflex she could not suppress. Dr. Sori's look stopped her hand midair. "Policy," he repeated as if held personally responsible for the existence of rules. The door groaned open and shut. The fan circled. The ledger waited. A plantain seller outside stared at the commotion and set down her basin. She had once lost a cousin to the policy and knew the sound of loss before it had language. A mother crossing a threshold and finding a wall. An ambulance siren bled into the background, not hurrying anyone. The silence around the boy felt like a negotiation he was losing breath by breath. "Where will I find money?" Aminata asked, voice catching. "My husband is on the road. He sends tomorrow. Tomorrow is a continent away." The doctor's phone buzzed. He glanced and smiled, small, private. A message from a broker in a group chat promising express triage for a fee. The rhythms of the ward never surprised him anymore. People paid where doors jammed. He had learned to turn his face when the jam made a sound like a child trying to inhale. Miriam thought of a training slide that once declared the golden hour, then of the ledger that had devoured the hour whole. She felt the room tilt toward a decision that would be recorded, if recorded at all, as just another unpaid line. By the time Ibrahim's convoy clicked into the gravel lot like beads on a string, the ward's temperature carried the stubbornness of mid-afternoon. The security detail opened doors, searching for threat, unaware the threat had already housed itself in a rulebook. Aminata faced the glass, child in arms, a human plea pressed against a system with edges. The story found its first breath in that collision, soft lungs against hard policy. And the next breath would require someone to place a hand on the door and push. The leader did not announce himself with speeches. The corridor announced him instead, straightening as if a wind moved down it. Ibrahim's steps were light, but they rearranged the hallway's hierarchy. He paused where the fan's shadow chopped across the floor and took in the small mathematics unfolding at the cashier's window. Aminata explained without words. Every mother knows how, lifting the boy so the blue around his lips could be understood in any language. The glass stayed between them like a theology. "Who is stopping care?" Ibrahim asked, not loudly. The question carried weight because it was specific, and names find it difficult to hide under specificity. The cashier pointed to policy 11.3 taped to the glass. Its edges were curled and greasy from years of justification. The doctor stepped forward, chin up. "We require payment before procedures," he said. "If we treat without payment, we invite chaos." He did not mean the boy's chaos. He meant ledger chaos, the kind that meant phone calls and audits and the quiet punishment of being excluded from the inner circle. Miriam looked down at her hands. Courage is often a small decision that arrives unannounced. She reached for the oxygen valve and turned it. The hiss started like a secret spoken into the wrong ear. She fitted the mask to the boy's face and watched the chest lift with more willingness. Her voice shook. "We have a breath to save before we have a bill to write." The sentence felt like a stone landing in a pond, ripples moving toward every pair of listening ears. Ibrahim lifted the policy card off the glass, gentle as removing a bandage. He examined the fine print, a clause referencing a cost recovery directive 5 years old and poorly summarized. "Who wrote this?" he asked, more to the wall than the man. The doctor pointed toward administration, then away toward the ministry, then vaguely upward at the sky where accountability floats when you are accustomed to passing it along. Outside, a murmur grew as families pressed toward the doorway, pulled by the magnet of change that sometimes accompanies a motorcade. Simple questions made witnesses confident. The boy's breath deepened. Aminata exhaled for the first time since dawn. The door's hinge let out a long complaint as someone pushed in with another stretcher. The arithmetic of emergencies does not allow for long lectures. Ibrahim's aide, Yoro, arrived with a small notebook, the kind that hums with lists. "Yeah, we have 3 options," he said, quick and low. "Treat and violate policy, comply and watch him fade, or suspend the policy now and face the ledger later." The doctor caught that last word and clung to it like a talisman. Later. He preferred problems, scheduled for later. The leader's eyes moved to the blue carbon copy slips, stacked on a clip. The top one carried a sum that could feed a family for a week. He imagined the road that produced that number, a chain of orders, a deficit, a donor report demanding measurable collection rates, a workshop with catered lunches where someone spoke about sustainability. The hospital had become an invoice engine to appease a spreadsheet. Ibrahim touched the carbon with his thumb until the page smudged. "We suspend it now," he said, and his voice cooled the room by replacing heat with clarity. "Treat first. Write later. I will hold the ledger." The doctor began to object, then stopped when he realized which door had opened. The oxygen continued its whisper. Miriam signaled a resident who had been waiting for permission disguised as a command. He moved like a spring released. A cannula slid into place. A monitor woke and stuttered its small green measure of life. The boy's chest found a rhythm that asked for more time. The cashier's hand hovered, uncertain where to set the pen, hovering between an old rule and a new possibility. "Who else has been refused today?" Ibrahim asked, and the corridor answered with faces. A man with a bandaged arm that had leaked through, a grandmother holding a folded prescription like a boarding pass she could not afford to use, a teenage girl with a fever bright in her forehead. The leader's gaze gathered them and held. "Miriam," he said, "bring them in the order of danger, not the order of receipts." She nodded and moved, and the ward moved around her. Yusuf the porter unclipped a cylinder with a grin that felt like an apology from the building itself. The doctor watched as the room obeyed a different gravity. Something old inside him argued about order and abuse and budgets and the mechanics of fairness. But another voice, small and inconvenient, reminded him of his first night as an intern when he learned to count pulses with his eyes. He had built a career by listening to the wrong voice, because the wrong voice had a desk and a lock. He rubbed his badge with his thumb, as if the plastic might offer advice. Ibrahim stepped aside to avoid becoming the center of the choreography he had started. He took Aminata's phone, found the emergency contact, and recorded a short message for the husband, his tone steady. "Your son is being treated. No one will ask for money before breathing." He returned the phone with a nod that did not demand gratitude. The crowd adapted to a new rule with relief bordering on disbelief. The door, which had spent its day policing who passed, now swung freely, protesting less each time, as if the hinge had finally received oil. Outside, someone started a prayer. Inside, the first IV bag hung like a small flag claiming the ward for common sense. By the time the sun slid behind the water tower and left the courtyard in cooled bronze, the ward had become a demonstration of an uncomplicated miracle disguised as procedure. Ibrahim did not stride in and out. He settled at a plain desk, borrowed from admissions, sleeves rolled. The desk was ordinary wood, nicked along the edges by years of impatient coins. He reshaped it into a different kind of gate. Whoever approached got a listening that weighed more than any stamped form. The cashier still sat behind glass, but the pen now wrote after vitals, not before. The rhythm changed first, then the rules would follow. He asked for the triage board, a white rectangle with tired markers. "Reorder this," he told Miriam, by urgency alone. "Color codes are fine. Money is not a color." She drew circles that meant red, yellow, green, her hand steadier with each line. The porter moved chairs to create a fast lane with a humor that made people forgive the move. A sign was taped beside policy 11.3, a hand-lettered line in bold, "Treat first, bill later." Someone snapped a photo and sent it across groups with a caption, "New policy. Man with quiet eyes says so." The digital rumor outran bureaucracy. Euro placed his notebook on the desk, flipped to a blank page, and drew 3 boxes. Door to help minutes, denials today, complaints resolved. He calculated nothing yet. He only wrote the names and underlined them because naming a metric is the first blow against fog. "We will measure what we mean," he said, almost to himself. The doctor watched the neat handwriting with a feeling close to envy. Clarity looks like a superpower when you've trained in confusion. "Where will the money come from?" he asked, letting the old fear out because it had nowhere else to go. "We cover from the emergency fund," Ibrahim replied. "You have one?" The doctor blinked. "It exists," Ibrahim added, "in the line no one reads because it doesn't come with a workshop." "The child? Awa's son?" the nurse corrected, softly giving the boy his mother's name back in his record. Stabilized. His breathing, once a negotiation, became a contract. Aminata stood at the foot of the bed, hands folded, not as a supplicant now, but as a witness. She mouthed a thank you and then stopped, as if remembering that gratitude is heavy and she must save her arms for later. The ward smelled of antiseptic and peeled oranges someone had brought to share. Even the fan's blades seemed to spin with intention. "Bring me the ledger," Ibrahim said, and it arrived like a guilty child carrying its own shadow. He did not scold it. He opened to the day's entries and found the blank spaces where refused care should have been recorded. He drew a straight line through the date and wrote in block letters, "Breathe before billing." Beneath, he wrote a number, an authorization, signing his name in simple script. "This is not a speech," he said to the room that had gathered. "It is an order of operations. Breath first, billing after. Anyone who disobeys will explain themselves to me in writing within 24 hours. Anyone who obeys and is punished will call this number." He slid a card across the desk. The inked digits were a direct line, not to a ministry, but to the desk where he now sat. Miriam exhaled. A junior nurse next to her let a smile escape. The doctor lifted his chin as if to resist, then let it settle back, discomfort loosening. "Write later," he murmured, as if trying the sentence on. "Write later," Yoro echoed, head bent over the boxes. The repetition gave the rule a spine. The intervention did not end with a proclamation. It bent into habits. Ibrahim asked for a drill with embarrassing simplicity. "We will practice one scenario," he said. "A child arrives with respiratory distress and no money. What do you do?" Miriam answered first. "Oxygen, airway check, call the resident, document vitals, mark red." The doctor added, "Notify pharmacy, pull emergency meds from the unlocked kit, log care in the chart and on the board." Euro added, "Log door to help time." The porter said, unprompted, "Hold the door." The ward repeated the drill twice, then a third time with roles swapped. Laughter threaded through the repetitions, the kind that comes when fear curdles into competence. By evening, the new choreography looked old enough to have been there all along. A WhatsApp status began to circulate. They saved a boy without asking for coins. In another group, the brokers complained in muted tone, replaced by vouchers and a note from administration. Emergency care billed weekly, not at the door. The rumble of a different battle grew somewhere distant. Budgets, angry calls from those with a stake in the old traffic at the gate. But in the ward, the intervention drew breath and offered it to the next patient. Ibrahim did not leave with cameras. He sat until the hallway's echo thinned. "Tomorrow we count," he told Euro, tapping the boxes. "And tomorrow night we publish." He meant a chalkboard by the entrance and a message sent to everyone who had waited at this door in the last week. The doctor imagined his name on a list and felt a lash of fear. Then a wash of something else he hadn't felt since before he memorized policy 11.3. Relief. The ledger on the desk looked smaller. Outside, the evening call to prayer floated over the lot. Aminata looked at her sleeping child, then at the door that had almost been his final border. The porter propped it open with a wedge of wood. The hinge at last was quiet. Night turned the hospital corridors into a soft archive, where everything was the same shape and secrets were easier to lift. Yoro returned before dawn with 2 thermoses and a team of auditors, not in suits, but in simple shirts, the kind of clothing that makes doors forget to resist. They did not hunt for scandal. They hunted for facts. They began with logs, moved to prescription pads, ended with the micro-ledgers that live inside phones, chats, transfer screenshots, the way a modern gate whispers to itself while pretending to be a wall. The cashier's ledger told part of the story. Receipts spike at month end, then thin during holidays. Denials almost never appear in ink. They leave a negative space like a body chalked on a street. But the pharmacy tally sheet offered a counterpoint. A week when oxygen masks were out of stock, a week when they were reserved, and a week when they somehow exceeded recorded usage. Evidence that care moved through a shadow channel, greased by tips called facilitation. The gate didn't need to slam. It needed only to pivot toward those who could pay. Mariam brought them the triage book, pages flecked with coffee, corners bent. She had started quietly marking the time between entry and first intervention months ago as a private protest. Her pencil lines now sang. On bad days, the number circled 45 minutes. On days when a certain supervisor went on leave, it dropped under 10. The pattern had a face, an obstructive official who believed in immaculate receipts more than messy breath. The auditors did not write adjectives. They wrote timestamps. The investigation moved outward. A telegram group named FastPass fused gossips and commerce. A broker with a nickname that sounded like a dessert offered solution bundles that guaranteed a bed and a first look for a fee. Payment methods included mobile money and vouchers. Screenshots incriminated no one powerful, only those mid-level enough to taste both fear and ambition. In a voice note, the broker complained that the new man with the notebook was ruining the order. The word order did too much work in that sentence. Ibrahim listened while writing nothing. He preferred details to outrage. Yoro read aloud a clause from Directive 7B. In life-threatening situations, care must not be delayed pending payment. The clause had slept inside the policy like a seed no one watered. Administrative circulars had referenced it as an appendix, then ignored it in practice because collection targets were simple to measure and lives saved less so. Somewhere between a donor report and a departmental bonus scheme, a perverse incentive opened its mouth and swallowed the clause whole. The auditors printed the clause at 200% and taped it where policy 11.3 had been. The doctor, whose name appeared in none of the group chats and all of the rotas, watched the evidence accumulate like rain in a shallow bowl. He had refused to break a posted rule, and in doing so had broken the core one he'd once sworn to: do no harm. The exposure felt more like a mirror than a trap. He asked to speak and did not perform contrition. He described pressure points, weekly calls for collections, a notice that departments hitting targets would receive equipment upgrades, a rumor that those who did not would find their training slots evaporate. The incentives aligned like a doorframe that bends a shoulder without anyone noticing. Ibrahim nodded. Systems have personalities, he often said, and this system had become a cashier with a stethoscope. Yoro placed 3 sheets on the desk, each titled like a character in a play. The gate, policy 11.3 as interpreted. The broker, informal fee channel. The blindfold, missing metrics. The sheets were spare, a map with 3 symbols. We will name them in public, he said, not to shame but to remove camouflage. The hospital spokesperson arrived, cheeks tense, ready with sentences that had served uncertain administrations before. Ibrahim stopped him with a small palm. No press conference, he said. A dashboard, a number on a wall, a message to every phone that has suffered this door. The porters, whose humor documented the place better than any report, offered an oral history of refusals and creative workarounds. They described a night when a blood bag was a bargaining chip and a morning when a newborn waited for oxygen while a mother argued into a glass hole. Their stories were not professional complaint. They were logistics with heartbeats attached. The auditors wrote, and the ward's air made room for the possibility that listening is a form of justice. By midday, the exposure had a shape that could be shared without defamation. No one would be accused of literal theft. The theft was of minutes. No names would be dragged beyond those who lent their signatures to a broken sequence. The ledger's ossified order, bill, then breath, would be proven a misreading of the very directive meant to steer it. Evidence did the work press releases pretend to do. Ibrahim stood at the entrance where the chalkboard now hung, its first row chalked fresh. Door to help, so 6 minutes. Denials today, 0. Complaints resolved, 3. He touched the numbers not as a performance, but as a reminder that accountability is tactile. The child slept deeper, the kind of sleep that belongs to those who have walked away from an edge and are surprised to be standing. Aminata stepped outside to call the road where her husband was. "They opened the door," she said, and the silence on the other end was a tear you could hear. The crowd moved differently now, less a crush, more a flow. Exposure had not yet become reform. It had, however, turned the hinge toward daylight. The gate, named and mapped, lost some of its power to pretend it was neutral. Reform, Ibrahim believed, should be small enough to understand on a crowded day and strong enough to outlast a change in weather. He gathered the hospital's team in the hallway because that's where the problem lived. He held up a single page with a title in clear font, Breath Before Billing Rule, Golden Hour Protocol. The rule was not new law. It was a rearrangement of sequence, the difference between putting a door at the front of the house or around the kitchen. "Treat first, bill later," the page began. "In emergencies, no one stands at glass. We stabilize, we document, then we settle." He didn't read the whole page. He handed it to the doctor to do so. Authority given away becomes culture. The second page was a map, not a metaphorical one, a literal map of the ward with arrows. "Stretcher comes here. Oxygen kit here. Red patients, straight to this bed. Pharmacy unlock code for emergency kit posted here. No hidden gates. Every day at 8, he said, we run the simple drill." He looked deliberately embarrassed saying it. "It will feel like school. Let it." "The point is boredom." Laughter shook some stiffness free. "Repetition is how institutions relearn how to breathe." Funding came next. "We end the bonus for collections," Ibrahim said. "We replace it with a block grant for emergencies, released monthly against our 3 numbers. He tapped the chalkboard now rendered in plastic and fixed to the wall. "Door to help minutes. Denials last 24 hours. Complaints resolved. If these improve, your budget holds steady. If they slip, your budget doesn't tighten. Your supervision does." He didn't threaten. He specified flow. Money would arrive, not because people paid at the door, but because minutes fell and denials stayed at 0. A single mobile money wallet printed on the poster, absorbed donations and co-pays to reduce handling. Brokers were cut by architecture, not by shouting. The complaint channel went live that afternoon. A short code printed in large numerals landed across the district on flyers, slipped into shocks of plantains, on buses, in mosques, on WhatsApp statuses. "Text breath," the instruction said, "if refused care or asked for fee." An automated reply logged the time, the ward, the initials of the staff if known, and promised a callback within 4 hours. A small room behind admissions, windowless and unimportant, became the complaints desk staffed by 2 retired midwives who had absolute moral authority and a notebook that frightened administrators more than any minister. Ibrahim visited them first and last. Enforcement could not be a rumor. 2 administrative officers were reassigned pending review for inventing reservation fees. A broker's number was added to a list sent to security at the gate with the instruction, simple as a proverb, no intermediaries. The doctor received a formal warning for rigid misinterpretation. Paired with enrollment in a training he had once dismissed, he didn't lose face so much as he lost a practiced blink. Miriam received a citation not printed on glossy paper, but on the clipboard hung near the oxygen rack. Nurse Miriam initiated care during policy conflict, saving a life. Praise printed on a wall where prying eyes would see it and copy. Publicness finished the circle. Every evening at 7 p.m., the chalkboard became a photo. The photo became a post on the hospital's page and rode into chat groups with the same vigor that gossip once enjoyed. Yoro set up a small page called The Breath Board, updated with 3 graphs that did not crash phones. The community voice, a radio host with a calm baritone, gave a minute nightly, "Door to help improved by 2 minutes. Denial 0 for 4 days. Complaints yesterday, 6, resolved 5, 1 pending." Numbers acquired a rhythm. People began to ask, after greetings and weather, "How many minutes today?" The ward learned that dignity loves a number you can point to. Within a week, the old fear, what happens if everyone abuses the new rule, proved itself a myth. There were no hordes arriving to game a system that had finally agreed to be humane. Instead, there were fewer delays, less shouting, more eyes making the right choices without waiting for permission. An inspector from the ministry arrived with a skeptical half-smile and left with a copy of the 1-page rule tucked into his folder like a lifeline. The brokers moved on to other gates and found them less welcoming because the story had traveled faster than they could pivot. Aminata paid a small amount 3 days later when her husband arrived, bone-tired and still smiling. He insisted, in a stubborn way that kindness recognizes, on contributing to the ledger that had been rewritten to include him. The cashier, now deft in new choreography, entered it after the discharge, noting post-stabilization payment in the margin. The ledger didn't mind. Ledgers have no ideology. They mirror the hands that write them. The boy left through the door that once guarded against him. The hinge had been oiled so many times during drills it moved as if ashamed of its earlier screech. 2 weeks, Ibrahim told the team. Then I step back and you keep the board clean. He meant that reform must become municipal, not personal. He walked the corridor and collected the paper signs with policy numbers misread into cruelty. He left the map and the rule in the board. He left a smaller ledger at the complaints desk, its first lines already neat, not with fines but with resolutions. He left the desk he had borrowed, returned to admissions where it belonged, now changed by the memory of what had been decided upon it. He left, finally, the insistence that every system has a door and someone must hold it with their back when wind rises. Morning in the ward became boring in the way a good bakery is boring. The same ritual, the same heat, the same satisfaction that something essential will arrive on time. At 8, the drill, the porter would shout a playful "action," then blush, then lift the doorstop while Miriam checked the oxygen. A resident would roll his eyes, and then, without thinking, time the door to help with a watch he once used for exams. The doctor, less stern now and more particular, would find a missing mask, point, and someone would fetch it. Repetition sanded edges that speeches never could. The board at the entrance blended into the wall, as furniture does when it has earned its place. Visitors glanced, nodded, walked on. 0 denials became unremarkable. When the number flickered to 1 after a power cut, snarled triage. The complaints desk recorded it. A callback was made, and the nurse on duty, new, nervous, received a visit heavy on coaching, light on punishment. Systems that work do not assume perfection. They assume course correction. The radio host's nightly minute grew dull in a way that warms tired places. Door to help, 7 minutes. Denials, 0. Complaints resolved, 3. Households folded the information between weather and football scores. Other gates noticed. The registry across the avenue where births were documented realized its own glass window had turned into a moat. A midwife from the hospital carried over a laminated card. Register first, fees later for urgent certificates. She had no power to order it. She had a story. A school headmaster visited the ward, liked the neatness of the board, and returned to hang one by his office labeled "Books by Friday." Complaints answered. A bus station manager printed a sign, "Board first, pay after for emergencies." And the driver whose mother had died waiting did not cry. He simply drove smoother that day. Ibrahim moved on. He did not carry the ward as a medal. He carried it as a checklist item, a thing that must survive his attention. Once a month, a small team returned at odd hours to watch the door. They came without cameras, bought tea in the courtyard, and asked foolish questions with serious faces. Who holds the key now? What do you do when the drill is boring? Who calls the complaints desk when the complaints desk is tired? Culture does not rot when inspected gently. It grows cartilage around new bones. The doctor began to teach. He drew the map on a whiteboard for interns, leaving his name out of the story as if to be kind to himself. He found himself saying, "After you breathe" in staff meetings where budgets once swallowed entire afternoons. He used the ledger to show how solved problems produce calmer arithmetic. He learned to like the sound of the door when it moved easily. He began, occasionally, to prop it open with his foot while carrying a file, a small domestic act of atonement. Aminata visited one Sunday with a bag of oranges for the ward. She did not expect anyone to remember. Miriam did. They cut the fruit and passed slices between charts and IV poles, the smell of peel oil thin and clean above antiseptic. The boy ran a hand along the smooth plastic of the oxygen cylinder, curious, unfearful. He traced the chalkboard letters with a finger. He did not know he had once been a number waited upon. He would not know because the point of good policy is to make memory unnecessary for survival. The brokers found other corners, but they learned to listen for the rumor of a gate that had been renamed. A breath first became a phrase that meant do the obvious. It appeared on stickers and once on a cake someone brought to the complaints desk for a birthday. The midwives laughed until they cried. The hospital's WhatsApp groups quieted. Absence of excuses makes chats thin. Occasionally a message arrived at midnight. We had a refusal. By dawn, the number on the board had already absorbed it and returned to 0, not through magic, but through the boredom of a callback and a conversation and a line in a notebook that said, "Resolved." In the end, the hinge was the hero. If you stood by the door at morning rounds, you could feel the small exhale the building made when it moved. It no longer decided. People did. Ibrahim's name faded from daily sentences, replaced by a pronoun that meant any leader, any day, who says the order of things matters more than the label on the glass. The ledger, now smudged with notes no donor would complain about, sat on a shelf within easy reach rather than as a barricade. Outside, the city pulsed with other gates learning to be doors. Inside, the ward became a place where breath was the first currency, and everything else a footnote written neatly after the work was done. The story emptied itself into habit, which is all reform ever wanted. To be so reliable that the child's first full inhale is unremarked, and the only sound anyone hears is the door opening, easily. And again, as the music settles and the final image fades, take a breath with us, the kind that feels like a small promise kept. Stories like this are built by ordinary courage and made durable by communities that refuse to look away. If the journey moved you, carry it one step further. If you liked the video, then like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your voice helps good systems spread.